with something a little bit different, inviting you into a grounding practice that also takes the time to acknowledge our shared virtual space and the connections between us, to embody well-being, I guess, so it's not just an intellectual exercise. So a big part of our discussion is focused around how well-being is relational and social. So it feels apt to begin this way. So with that in mind, I invite you just to take a few moments to become settled. Get yourself comfy and checking in with yourself so that your spine is straight, shoulders are relaxed, and your head balanced. And giving yourself permission to gently let go of the things in your busy morning, no doubt, and allowing yourself to drop into this shared space together today. Lowering your gaze or even closing your eyes if that feels comfortable for you. And if you choose, just gently resting your attention on your breath and feeling it move in and move out of your body. And at a certain point, bringing to mind a loved one. This could be a person or even a pet. Bringing them into your heart and your mind with kindness and wishing them well. And silently saying to yourself, may they be safe. May they be well. And now, allowing the same kindness to extend to others here in our shared virtual space who care about well-being just as you do. May we be safe and may we be well. And finally, if you choose, extending caring and kindness to all beings. The intention here is to extend the kindness and care to all living beings and remembering that that also includes you. May all be safe, may all be well. And now coming back to our relaxed body and resting in clear awareness of the present moment, allowing ourselves to show up just as we are, complete and whole. This loving kindness practice is shown to strengthen compassion and social connection and well-being. And I thank you for taking part. I feel connected and excited to explore things today. Like it's warm and sunny with a breeze. So I'm going to ask other people now in the panel to introduce themselves, also in terms of the weather, just as a bit of a twist, to describe how they're going with things right now. And then if you choose, you can feel comfortable to share what you're feeling in the chat box as well. So Vili, can I hand this over to you now to introduce yourself?
Malolele, everybody. I'm speaking to you from Auckland. I can't see the outside of my office, so I don't know what the weather is like out there. But anyways, thanks for that exercise this morning, Leanna. I think it makes us connect in certain ways, but especially to connect with oneself. So thank you for that. I work in a company called the Course Collective, It's a very new company. It's a Pacific lead organization, and our work revolves around influencing systems in order to better respond to the needs of the people. I think that's a short summary of the things that we do. Thank you.
James, would you like to go? I'll go after. I can start off, James. Okay, I can hear you. Okay, I'll let you go.
Mallory, good morning, everyone. I'm here in Glenorchy on vacation with my family. The weather is pretty good today. It was windy yesterday, but you can see the mountain peaks at the back. So it's nice and sunny. I also work with Vili for the Cause Collective, and yeah, in summary, following what Vili said, we look at some of the social problems that persist in our Pacific communities. Thank you.
And I like to describe myself as a maker of fermented food, something which I've picked up as a passion. So I make a lot of breads and kimchi and sauerkraut and kefir water and a lot of wellness food to keep me well. And that's how I like to describe myself and what I do. With the weather, I'm feeling a sense of calm, especially with the exercise, Leanna, the one which you took us. I think there's a real sense of calm which has come in, and I think that's kind of reflected on the weather outside. But I just hope it's not the calm before the storm, So I think I have maybe a bit of an anxiety when there's too much calm, that something's a bit not right, sort of when you're leaving the house and you feel like everything's okay, or you're going on vacation but you've forgotten something, so it's that feeling left behind. So I hope it's not one of those, and it's just a nice calm which is going to be followed by plenty of sunshine. When I'm not baking bread, I'm a behavioral scientist at Behavioral by Design, something which I've been fascinated by as a behavioral scientist is thinking about the ergonomics of society. And this is what Christian Harris has reflected. He's a former design ethicist at Google, and he's reflected this in his documentary with Netflix called Social Dilemma. I haven't seen it yet, so don't leave any spoilers, but he does talk about this idea of the ergonomics of society. And you can think about ergonomics, a great example being when you go out to buy a new chair, you have a selection of adjustable backrest or medium firm cushion seating, or mobility wheels to take you back and forth to chat to your colleagues. And so when it comes to office chairs especially, we've gotten really good. We've almost mastered what are the physical needs of people, what do their bodies need, and we'll make them chairs which help them maintain better postures or to avoid backrest. So you'd be pretty surprised if you show up to an office and you have instead of chairs to sit on, you have only cactus. That would really poke you and bother you. So we don't do that. But when it comes to designing our services, on the other hand, there's very little attention which we give to the psychological needs of people. And we think about this from a behavioral science lens. We think about this in terms of the social norms in the environment or the contextual factors which may influence someone. So we don't consider the psychological factors. We quite often roll out these initiatives and sort of hope for the best. And there's very little deliberate design involved in this process. This is why I'm super excited to for our discussion today. So for our panel discussion between 4 of us, and there's a collaboration which we've started, an awesome journey with you, the team at Cause Collective. And I know it's very early days, but we're hoping to share some of our learnings and share some of our journey of integrating Pacific health models with a behavioral science lens as we explore the ergonomics of well-being in our communities. For our panel discussion, I'd like to open up with passing on the floor to James and Viliami to share some of the amazing work your teams have been doing and to share some insight in terms of how you work with communities in South Auckland, right from building trust, but also getting deeper to understanding the real challenges the community is facing. Through our session, feel free to share your comments on the chat. We'll pick up the discussion as we go through our panel session, and we'll pick up your questions too. Starting off, James, would you like to give us some background behind the awesome work the team at Cause Collective does in understanding well-being of the community around you?
Thank you, Vishal. The Cause Collective is about the major contributions that we make to society and understanding the social problems of communities, as we try to figure out ways to voice the experiences of individuals and communities in a way that it pays respect to their culture and their individual unique experiences in a way that it becomes real when policies and when rules are made out in public. And we do this by consciously being aware of their unique individual cultural places that people come from. And we were a Pacific organizations, and we try our best to understand our communities in the light that they want to be represented, and try to influence government and systems to take their transformations based on those experiences.
I know, both from an evolutionary philosopher as well as a thinker and a social engineer of different disciplines, Daniel Schwarzenberger, he points out that through industrialized farming, we've virtually wiped out most of the species of fish in a planet which is mostly water, 70% water, and we've wiped out, most of the fish in our water. And we have a socioeconomic system as the status quo, which is in place, and a socioeconomic system which largely incentivizes certain behaviors. So it incentivizes you're incentivized better with a dead fish than for keeping a fish alive, or for keeping a whale, or keeping nature alive. And there's a whole lot of gaps within the current socioeconomic system which we don't always think of, and we tend to largely focus on some of the negatives around us. Viliami, I know we were exploring what a strengths-based approach looks like, and one of the discussions which we've been having are around first starting with while thinking about a new system, identifying what are the strengths of the system. So I'd love you to share some of the strengths and aspirations of the communities in South Auckland and the communities you work with.
Thank you, Vishal. We've been in this journey for about 5 years, where we focused our efforts mainly on the South Auckland communities. The first thing I think it needs to be said about this community, it's quite a diverse community, and it's definitely not homogeneous. The fact that it's not homogeneous can only mean that there is no one size fits all. So it makes the job a lot harder to deal with. However, there are common threats, common shared experience within this community, and those are either designed, is what Vishal was talking about, is the result of some systemic design or an effect of something that has been happening in the community that makes it what it is. What we notice is that these type of communities are mainly made up of Maori, Pacific, and low socioeconomic residents. So they're at the bottom of the economic scale. What we also notice is that these people, especially the Maori and the Pacific, they come from an indigenous way of thinking, indigenous cultures, and are now planted in South Auckland, which is highly exposed to a different type of culture. So there is some kind of clash there, a cultural clash between what is being considered a indigenous culture versus new and upcoming type of cultures. So what we see around the world, and even very dominant in New Zealand nowadays, are these culture we call the autonomous culture, where everybody's for themselves. They make up their own rules, which is quite different to where indigenous people come from. Their type of culture more theonomous, meaning they've got their rules and customs and practices from some kind of higher power. So it's and when this type of culture has some kind of clash, that's the kind of clash that these people are facing with, which have a huge impact on the way they live their life in South Auckland. With that, we know that poverty is high in this type of setting, like in South Auckland. And when you think about poverty versus poverty within an autonomous driven culture, it can be quite devastating in its effect. Vishal asked about what are some of the strengths that South Auckland has. Basically, to me, the strength that South Auckland has is they are very familiar with being the weak one, with being at the bottom. We've been scraping the bottom of the bucket. That's a strength in my view, because when you are familiar with that, then it's setting the conditions for change. So I think from that angle, it's quite positive. So if we think about, therefore, what is good, what is that good looks like for South Auckland, I suppose what I can say is that good is at this point in time is quite an abstract. It's very difficult to see, but it's very obvious to see the bad. Things like it's bad when my child has not a spare school shoe. It's bad when I do not have a steady income. It's bad when the bank turns my loan application down to buy a heat pump during winter. It's bad when my elderly father is getting pneumonia in my own house. It's that kind of bad, which is very real in South Auckland. The problem is that it still remains a problem for quite some times now. And then to think about what are some of the aspirations for South Auckland. It's very difficult because it's relative. Anyone's aspirations is based on where its starting point is. The aspirations of the like of South Auckland, who are at the bottom of the heap, is quite different to the aspirations of those further up the scale. So most people's aspiration is to get from day to day, to live from. It's from a relativistic point of view. That's really sad. It's quite sad. But then you can only see the sky when you're outside. So I think I'll leave it at that, Vishal. Just have some idea or discussions around that if you want. Mara?
Thank you for sharing your reflections. I know when we consider the health of an individual or the health of a person, we don't talk about, the person's liver or the person's kidney in isolation. We talk about the person as a whole. And I think the same is true about well-being. Leanna, would you like to reflect on why we need to go beyond thinking about well-being as an individual construct to exploring it as a more collective system?
Yeah, sure. So sort of reflecting on when I first started researching the science of well-being sort of back a decade ago, thought it was interesting to pause and reflect on why we came to focus on the individual, like the historical events that aren't so obvious, things like the Industrial Revolution, where it became natural in the West that everything could be understood by how things worked, like you pull things apart and then you can put them back together again without much concern about how they operate in the system, as a system and in a system. So now there's, I guess, more attention being paid to the importance of these interactions and how our social worlds predict well-being, that Indigenous thinking has known forever, and Western science is starting to kind of pay more attention to as well. So what researchers are calling a bio-psychosocial approach. So how our biology, things like our physical health, genetic vulnerabilities, our mental health, like coping skills, and our social environment are all interconnected. They don't function in a silo, like in a reductionist, mechanistic way. But there's still this collective bias, I feel, that puts the burden of change on the individual without considering the systems and the conditions that are holding the problems in place. And Vili and James and us, we've discussed this, and yeah, I don't know if James, Vili, you've talked about using this bio-psychosocial approach, and wondered if you had any comments to add on that, and where systems might be falling short on sort of understanding and responding to wellbeing needs. Any reflections?
I'll have a go then, James. When something is hard to see, you look for defects. And defects is everywhere in South Auckland. It's not so much in Remuera or those other affluent communities, but it's quite obvious in South Auckland, eh? So we conclude that there is something wrong with the system, which created these disparities in effects. So what we can put our fingers on is quite different for each case. So they can only conclude that the scope of the system effects is quite wide ranged, and its realities with different communities. I'm not quite sure how best to answer the question, because the question points to areas of weaknesses within the system, but that's assuming that the system is working. It's not working in most places that we are working with, and hence the reason why we exist is to see how we can marry up the abstraction of system to the realities of communities. I think James may have some more particular examples to that. Thanks.
Thanks, Vili. Thanks, Leanna. The only contribution I'd like to make is that, in alignment with what Leanna is saying, that we try to understand beyond, we try to understand the individual and those biopsychosocial domains. In reference to what Vishal was speaking to earlier about how the system is not incentivized to keep fish alive, in the same respect that within what we notice within government and other agencies, the organizations or the stakeholders aren't incentivized to understand the biopsychosocial factors of each individual. And relating to what Vili was saying, that the consequences is that we always place one shoe size fits all sort of approach, but it's not. It's a consequence of not being able to understand the incentives and the rewards for the system to force it to make it respectfully, reciprocally understand each individual's unique biopsychosocial factors.
Thanks for sharing that. And I really liked the reflection, really, about the assumption that we have that the system is working, and we really need to challenge, that is assumption right up front. I like to think of, the exercise and, the amazing work which we've been doing, right from trying to bring in new ways of thinking and integrating some of the models which you use to make sense of the world with a behavioral science lens. And some of the, just a quick idea of what a behavioral science lens could look like, or what a behavioral scientist does. A good starting place, or a good metaphor to discuss, is what social psychologist Jonathan Haidt explores as the rider and the elephant. So we have a rider who tends to we assume that the rider is the one who tends to take the elephant on the journey, but the elephant weighs about 6 tons more than the rider. The elephant is going to go where the elephant wants to go, and the way you move you might beg the elephant to move, but the elephant's not going to move if you beg the elephant to move, that unless the elephant wishes to move. And we sort of think about the brain largely that way, and we think about this human rider, as being our rational brain, and we like to think about the elephant as being our emotional automatic brain. And the way you actually get to changing behaviors, to creating new paths, so the path to get to your journey, if you make the path, remove any obstacles for the elephant to get there, the elephant is more likely to get there. Or if you make it a shorter path, the elephant is more likely to get there. So I like to think about, all we do as behavioral scientists is just, 3 things. We tend to identify where people want to go, and in this context, it's largely around what does good look like. So you need to know your destination for the elephant before you start your journey. I think there's an exercise, secondly, around seeking knowledge, so seeking how to get there to the destination. And there's plenty to learn from people who've tried to go to the destination but did not get there, as well as people who got to the destination. So there's lots to learn from what's currently working and what's not working. And lastly, the third area, which I think a behavioral science lens plays a major role in, is to creating new paths to changing behaviors, or to changing systems, or to changing mental models. So that's a quick summary. I know we've been exploring a framework, and I'd like to caveat it as an early stage exploratory framework. We've been validating it with data which the team at the Cause Collective has come in with. So it's very early stage, but we couldn't resist sharing what we found out, and sharing what we've been very excited by with you. And we'd love, maybe at the end of the discussion, for to hear any of your own feedback on this, and thoughts and reflection. I'll start maybe sharing my screen, and maybe we can pick out a few points to cover up the model. Maybe a good starting place, I'd love maybe James and Vili, if you'd like to share some thinking, or share some wisdom for in terms of what Pacific models can do in terms of shaping how we think about community well-being. And are there any Pacific models, in particular, you'd like to share? And we have the Whanau model on the screen, or the Whanau model.
just my comment is that, as some of you are aware, this is the model that was proposed by Carl Enderman, who's a psychiatric nurse, and historically it's been the foundation of for Pacific to refer to understand beyond the individual and look at the context that they exist in. A lot has happened between when this model was created and the realities that Pacific live in now. And the only other comment I would like to make before Vili has anything to say is that we are trying to contribute so that we modernize understanding the wellness of Pacific in Aotearoa.
Yeah. For Pacific, I'll be talking specifically about Pacific here, just because we've got this specific model go by. There are a number of different Pacific models that have been proposed by different academic people to look at, but they're all similar. They're all similar in its core, which is why this is still applicable. But as James was saying, there needs to be people are Pacific people in New Zealand are evolving a lot faster than the mental models or the practical models that are coming out. So there needs to be some kind of work to keep the way we think, because to me the model is necessary for thinking, maybe not so much for doing things, but for thinking, to inform the doings. So I think there still needs some work to be done around models to make sure it's always up to date with the evolving population in New Zealand. I think that's all I can say on that matter. But the core of it is it's there within those model of what it's intended to do.
Leanna, would you like to add to that? And maybe in terms of the adaptation we've added to the model in terms of applying a behavioral science lens, and the specific model which we've added is the Combi model, and how does Combi help in playing a role in understanding what's helping and hindering community well-being?
Yes. Thanks, Vishal. I think I'll just go back to a point that Vili made around what are the aspirations, and aspirations of community could be quite different than those further up. And getting by day to day speaks of surviving. So what does thriving, what's the bridging the surviving to thriving? What can behavioural science kind of shine a light on? And I think there's this question we start with is, well, how do we make it easier to follow through with the things that matter to community, that matter to the well-being of ourselves and each other? A lot of time, and I've seen this in my experience in workplace well-being, things are rolled out with good intentions, but without the compassion to attend to the little things that influence our decision making. So it's all about looking at what are the enabling conditions for thriving. Get rid of the blockers. Vishal, you talked about remove the obstacles for the elephant. Get rid of the blockers, but do more of what works. And what Combi has kind of helped us here is, well, first of all, Combi, for those who have joined and sort of looking at that going, what the heck is it? The model stands for capability, which is about knowing how to do something and having the skills mentally and physically to do it. The opportunity is about external things. So the role of the people and the things around us, what's in our environment, and the social influences. And motivation is split into automatic, so things like emotions that drive decisions, and also reflective, so like our goals, our identity, optimism, a sense that things are going to go well for us, and self-efficacy. So the B stands for behaviour. So I guess the point I want to make is that it's recognising behaviour is part of this interacting system, not just one thing. So it helps explain why there's this sort of gap between knowing and doing, or good intentions and not sort of following through. So this particular model was developed through 19 frameworks of behaviour change through a systematic review in the literature. So it's pretty robust. But you know what? It's also our job to always be critical thinkers, and questions like, where does power sit in the system that influences behaviour? So we're constantly reflecting on what we know, because no model is ever complete, right? We always have to be asking, who do I need to be talking to find out more? And if we want to co-create enabling conditions, we need to know what matters to people in the first place, so that leads to thriving. So with all of these dimensions in mind, not just one thing like mental well-being or physical, it's all these dimensions. So just the last point is that Combi sort of gives this systematic way of kind of looking at things, what's already happening in community, like people looking out for each other, and what's blocking, like systems being hard to access, and really kind of drilling down on, at a specific moment in time, how does that influence a decision to go one way or another? Vishal, is there sort of anything that you want to speak to that I might have missed, or raise a point on with Combi?
Well, thank you for sharing the reflections. I was more, the biggest learning for me was actually came from the Whanau model, and the interconnectedness of these different dimensions. And if one of these things aren't in place, everything isn't in place. My own well-being isn't in place if my financial well-being isn't in place, or my spiritual well-being isn't in place, and the entire thing collapses. I was super thrilled to, while looking at some of the data and some of the things which we were looking at, was the type of reflections which came from the community while the team at the Cause Collective engaged with the community. And I run many surveys a year, 10, 15, different types of surveys in a year. And I get very little useful information out of most surveys, and largely because people who tend to fill out a lot of the surveys do it out of haste and out of because they're getting paid. But I did notice that there's quite different with the type of surveys and with the type of insights which your team is getting from the community, and a lot of that stems down to the level of trust which you have with the community, and the amount of and we were talking about the importance of trust right up front in our conversation. Maybe as a leaving question, any leaving comments on that, James or Willie, right from how do you build trust and how do you gain better insights from your communities?
Thanks, Vishal. I'll have a go first. I think it's very important for us to. It's very important that we consider wisely how we approach our people, how we approach people. So we do not come out as being pampering and trying to gain trust through pampering people. Trust needs to be based on genuine reasons, on good foundations, and those needs to be be seen as long lasting, and not just a drive-in kind of or a drive-through kind of approach. It's I'm also mindful, Vishal, about the model that we have up here, because what we have found is that people who are more who are exposed to high level of bad experiences much more difficult to gain trust from them. And those experiences are related to the way the system responds to their needs. There are other type of not so good experiences, but it's to do very little with the system, and therefore it's those people are fine. We could get along, but the people who have been wronged by the system, very difficult to turn around, because they see us coming in as part of the problem, as part of the system, as opposed to be a conduit to a solution for them. So I think that needs to be highlighted as well. And that also needs to be highlighted in our models, in the models that we exercise, that negative experiences of people is a huge influence, on their behavior and on their kind of, the kind of stuff. Thanks.
James, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Vili. Yeah, just on Vili's point and my experiences in trying to gain the trust of individuals that have been wronged by the system. It's not, you can't be mechanistic in your approach to building trust. You would probably have to take the same care in building that relationship as if you imagine yourself courting an individual. It takes time and a lot of effort and careful thought to slowly build, to break down their distrust in their previous experiences with government agencies, etc. But in simple, you just have to listen to people, and when you react, reciprocate, take into account what they've said and reciprocate what you have heard in a sincere and genuine manner. But as what we're discovering, it takes time, because these individuals have been hurt by what really called the previous experiences of the system.
Thank you for sharing the reflections. I think that gives us a lot to think about, and I love these conversations which we have, because we get 5 more things to think about every time we speak. So thank you for sharing it. I'll pass it on to Leanna to leave us with a final practice of reflections for us.
Thanks, Vishal and James and Billy. And just want to respond to what James was saying about listening and reciprocating, feeling heard and understood. It takes time, and it's relational, as is well-being. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. A good reminder to put the duty of care and uphold relationships. So thank you. I just wanted to check in with people around any aha moments that folks might have what's landed with you, or what's come up for you. So just taking a couple of moments to reflect on what's been said, and if you feel comfortable, please share in the chat box, and we'll read out any, only if you're comfortable. It's just taking a few moments of stillness to let things absorb and mirror back.
And just to add to what Leanna was saying, if anyone would like to share what they're saying on voice, you're free to, unmute yourself and explode through saying it out loud if you prefer.
Thank you so much. There's so much gold in this conversation. I don't work with large communities, but I work with teams, and I could really see, especially the trust aspect. I often come in as I always come in as an external coach, and I'm often seen as part of the system. So it just resonated with me so much. It's a much smaller community, but I've just got tons of stuff I can kind of take away. And the thing I always am trying to do with people, first off, is not come in and tell them how to do stuff. It's always building that trust, right? Build that relationship. It's hard to sell that into an organization. They want you to just come fix it. But yeah, the trust is just so important. So yeah, thank you so much. I'll stop talking, but just lit me up. There's so much good stuff. I hope I can help more in the community too. That would be excellent. Thank you.
Any other final reflections to share?
Well, I'm mindful that it's now 12 o'clock. If something does sort of come up for you, I'm sure we're all very happy to chat on anything. So feel free to reach out. You can find out more about the work that James and Vili do at the Cause Collective on their website, and connect with people via LinkedIn if there's any sort of thoughts and questions you want to discuss a bit further. And from a behavioural insights point of view, you can also read up about what's happening in the world of behavioural science in our library section on the Behavioural by Design website. So just in closing, thank you all again. It feels really brilliant to connect, and look forward to more conversations and learning and sharing together. Thank you.
Sorry, just in closing, I think, thank you, Vili, Vishal, and Leanna, and everyone that's online. I just think it's awesome to see the push for applying behavioral science to understand as another critical tool to understand our the way that society works. I think more of it needs to be made conscious, so that even the normal person has those simple techniques to understand how things are created in society. And so awesome work, Vishal and Leanna. And thank you for everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you for bringing us into the journey. Super excited, and thank you everyone for joining us.